welcome to Hope Stories. Sometimes the people who can heal us the most are the ones we never saw coming. Imagine a grieving father, a daughter who hasn't smiled in years, and a choice that could shatter everything he's built, or finally make them whole. This is not a story about perfect lives or easy decisions. It's about love in its rawest form, the kind that demands courage when the world is watching, and loyalty when it would be easier to walk away. There's a secret here, one that will force a man to choose between protecting his reputation and protecting the only two people who still believe in him. And when the truth surfaces, it won't just test his heart, it will change it forever. Now, step into the garden where it all began. The late afternoon sun spilled molten gold over the sprawling estate in Charleston, South Carolina, turning the manicured lawns into a painter's dream. Michael Carter stood rigid at the edge of the garden, hands buried in the pockets of his tailored suit, the glint of his wedding band from a life long gone catching the light. 3 years had passed since the December rain, the slick highway, the runaway truck. 3 years since Laura's voice had been silenced, leaving behind their daughter, Emily, and a silence in the house so thick it felt like a physical thing. Emily had changed after the accident. The once lively girl who used to race barefoot through the halls, singing along to pop songs on the radio, now moved like a shadow of herself, quiet, guarded, and perpetually hunched over sketch pads. Every page was the same. A small house, 3 figures, the mother's face always blurred, scratched out, or shaded into nothingness. Michael had tried everything: child therapists, exotic vacations, private tutors, toys air freighted from Europe. But none of it breached the wall she'd built. The nights were the worst, her muffled sobs through the wall, his whiskey-laced tears alone in his study. And so here they were, on a Saturday afternoon that smelled faintly of roses and freshly cut grass, facing what he believed might be the answer. 7 women, handpicked over 2 months of meticulous research, stood in a neat line before him. Each one a paragon of success. CEOs, real estate moguls, heiresses to fortunes older than the country itself. Their dresses shimmered in hues of sapphire, crimson, gold. Diamonds winked in the sunlight like tiny declarations of power. Every single one had passed background checks, financial screenings, even psychological evaluations. Any of them could offer Emily a gilded life and Michael a partner in the high-wire world of Charleston's elite. He had told Emily she could choose any of them. He hadn't anticipated what any might mean. From the shadows of the rose trellises, Emily emerged in a plain black dress, walking with the gravity of someone twice her age. She stopped in front of the women, her large brown eyes moving from face to face. The air thickened as each candidate tried to break her silence. Offers of horses on private estates, trips to Paris, personal chefs, even a promise of a private art studio. Emily's gaze never softened. Then, without a word, she turned her head toward the far corner of the garden. There, kneeling in the soil, was Grace Miller, her hands in thick gardening gloves, tending to a stubborn patch of roses. Grace had been with the Carters for just over 3 years, arriving weeks after Laura's funeral. She was quiet, steady, and kept to herself, living in a small bungalow on the other side of town with her ailing mother. She never involved herself in the family's affairs. Emily began walking, past the silks and sequins, past the glittering smiles, to Grace. The gardener looked up, startled, her sandy brown hair escaping from a loose ponytail, eyes the color of honey meeting the girl's. "Hey, sweetheart," she said softly, brushing dirt from her knees. "You all right?" Michael felt something in his chest shift. Emily raised her arm, pointed straight at Grace, and spoke with a clarity he hadn't heard in years. "I choose her." The line of women tensed, painted smiles faltering. One stepped forward. "Emily, darling, you have to choose from us. That's the whole point." Another chimed in, her voice tightening. "Sweetheart, I can give you the best schools, the best future. Think about what's realistic." Emily turned, her voice steady. "I don't want presents or trips or things. I want a mom who loves me for me." It was a sentence so simple, so piercing, that it seemed to strip the garden of its warmth. One by one, the women tried again, pleading, bargaining, masking desperation with charm. Emily's rebuttals were sharp, each one revealing a depth of thought no 9-year-old should carry. Finally, she looked back at Grace. You never tried to buy me. You never asked for anything. You just cared. Grace's hands trembled inside her gloves. Emily, I'm just the gardener. I'm not part of this. Yes, you are, Emily said. You've been part of this all along. Michael's mind spun. He had promised her she could choose anyone. He hadn't considered this. The 7 women stood frozen, the air between them heavy with something unspoken. Pride, disbelief, maybe fear. And for the first time in years, Michael saw a spark in Emily's eyes, a light that had been buried under grief. He stepped forward, his voice low. Grace, would you be willing to talk about what this might mean? Grace blinked, her gaze darting between father and daughter. I don't know, Michael. This is more than I ever imagined. Emily's hand found Grace's, small fingers curling around calloused palms. It's everything I imagined. The garden seemed to hold its breath. Would you risk the judgment of an entire community to follow a child's unshakable choice? What would you do if the person who could heal your family wasn't the one you expected? And as Michael looked into Grace's eyes, he realized the real question wasn't whether she could be Emily's mother. It was whether he had the courage to let her be. Michael's heart was pounding in a way he hadn't felt since the day of the accident. The 7 women, their polished faces barely masking irritation, stood stiff as Emily clung to Grace's hand like it was the only thing keeping her upright. For a moment he thought he could smooth this over, buy time, talk privately, avoid the humiliation of this public unraveling. But Emily's voice cut through the Charleston air like glass. You said I could choose anyone. Was that a lie? The words landed like a punch. He could feel the weight of the promise pressing against his chest. The memory of her hollow eyes these past years haunted him. The flicker of life in them now was fragile, and he knew one wrong move could snuff it out again. Grace's gaze met his, searching, almost pleading, as if to ask whether he truly understood what he was stepping into. She'd been a steady presence in the periphery of his life, quiet and competent, but never someone he'd imagined holding such power over his future. One of the women, Veronica Hale, the real estate magnate with a talent for cutting people down in 3 words or less, finally broke the silence. Michael, for God's sake, think about the optics. You marry your gardener, and every deal, every meeting, every boardroom will see weakness. Do you really want to hand your competitors that? She wasn't wrong. He could already imagine the whispers at the country club, the headlines and society pages. But before he could form a reply, Emily turned on Veronica, her small voice dripping with conviction. If being kind and honest is weakness, I'd rather my dad be weak forever. Grace's grip tightened, but she said nothing. Michael's mind was at war. The businessman in him screamed about the fallout, the strategic misstep, the reputational cost. The father in him saw only his daughter's face, alive with hope for the first time in years. And then, like a slow rising tide, came a realization that chilled him. This wasn't just about Emily's happiness. It was about his own, about whether he had the courage to build a life on love instead of appearances. He opened his mouth to speak, but Grace stepped forward first, her voice low but steady. Michael, I can't be part of this decision unless you want it as much as she does. I won't be some bandage you stick over a wound you're too scared to face. Her words sliced through him more cleanly than Veronica's could have. She wasn't asking for pity or for rescue. She was asking for something far harder, commitment. Then came the twist he hadn't seen coming. Emily let go of Grace's hand, walked to him and pulled something from her dress pocket, a folded, creased piece of paper. She pressed it into his palm. I made this last night, just in case you said no today. He opened it. Inside was a drawing of their house, the 3 figures. But this time the mother's face wasn't erased. It was Grace's. Carefully drawn, the eyes warm, the mouth smiling. It was more than a drawing. It was a plea. A vision of the family Emily wanted back, and maybe the family Michael had been too blind to see could exist. But the silence that followed was broken by another voice, Robert Mitchell, his oldest friend, standing at the edge of the lawn. Michael hadn't even noticed him arrive. If you go through with this, Michael, you're not just marrying her. You're declaring war on every unspoken rule of this city. And once you do, there's no going back. His tone was not cruel, but it carried the weight of decades of shared battles, business and otherwise. Michael looked from Robert to Emily to Grace. The lawn felt smaller, the air tighter. He had built his life on controlling outcomes, calculating every move. But this wasn't a negotiation he could win on strategy alone. This was something raw, unmanageable, and perhaps, for the first time, worth risking everything for. What would you risk if following your heart meant dismantling the life and status you've spent decades building? And as Michael closed his fist around the drawing, the decision that could redefine his family and destroy his standing was no longer something he could delay. Robert's warning lingered in the humid air like the scent of the roses, heavy, impossible to ignore. Michael could feel every pair of eyes on him, the women in their couture armor, Grace with her guarded stillness, Emily with her trembling hope. He had been in high-stakes negotiations where millions hung in the balance, but nothing had ever felt this volatile. His instincts told him to retreat, to buy time, to make the decision later in the safety of a closed room. But when he looked down at the folded drawing in his hand, something shifted. It wasn't just paper. It was his daughter's faith, and faith once broken, never mended the same. He cleared his throat, but before he could speak, Grace stepped closer, her voice low enough that only he could hear. Michael, if you say yes to this for the wrong reason, you'll ruin us both. I can take the stares, I can take the gossip, but I can't take you waking up one day regretting me. Her words dug deep because part of him still feared she was right. He had built his empire by calculating every outcome, never leaping without a net. This was different. This was leaping into the unknown, with his daughter's heart tethered to his decision. Then Veronica, still unwilling to let the moment slip, delivered her blow. Ask her about her past, she said sharply, her eyes locked on Grace. Ask her why she left her last marriage. Ask her what she's not telling you. The words rippled through the gathering like a gust before a storm. Michael turned to Grace, searching her face for any flicker of guilt. Grace's jaw tightened, but she didn't look away. I'll tell you, she said, her voice steady but edged with something heavier. I walked away from a man who thought love was control, who decided my worth by how well I fit into the image he wanted. He didn't like that I kept my own mind, so he broke things instead. Dishes, doors, trust. One night, I left with nothing but my clothes and my mother's old Bible. That's my past, Michael. I didn't tell you because I didn't want pity. I've built myself up from nothing since then. Emily's grip on her father's sleeve tightened, but Michael's mind was spinning. He believed her. God, he believed her. But the revelation opened another layer of risk. Marrying Grace wouldn't just provoke Charleston's elite. It would invite whispers about her history, her baggage, and by extension, his own judgment. He could already hear the questions at investor dinners. Did you know? Was she hiding it? Robert stepped forward slightly, his tone quieter now. It's not the past that will cost you, Michael. It's the way people will use it. That was the truth that gnawed at him. Not whether Grace deserved this, but whether he had the backbone to protect her when the city turned its sharp edges on them both. Grace looked at him, eyes unflinching. You want to know what scares me? Not the whispers, not the judgment. What scares me is saying yes to you and finding out later you only picked me because Emily wanted it, not because you did. The accusation stung because it cut into the doubt he had tried to bury. Was he doing this for Emily or for himself? And if it was for himself too, could he admit that without feeling like he was betraying Laura's memory? He had never realized how tangled his grief still was until this moment, when love and loss stood shoulder to shoulder in front of him, demanding he choose which to hold on to. Emily stepped between them, her voice trembling but resolute. I don't care about her past. I care about my future, and she's in it, if you'll let her be. The garden went still again, as if the roses themselves were waiting to hear what he would decide. If you were in Michael's position, would you let the fear of public judgment outweigh the chance to rebuild your family's happiness? And as Michael met Grace's unwavering gaze, he knew that whatever he said next could either bind them together forever or shatter everything beyond repair. Michael's fingers tightened around the drawing until the paper began to crease. the faint sound loud in the tense stillness. His heart felt like it was being pulled in opposite directions, one toward the life he had built with precision and control, the other toward a future that was messy, unpredictable, but alive. Grace's past didn't scare him. What scared him was the certainty that if he chose her, the world he'd carefully engineered would never look at him the same way again. And yet, when he looked at Emily, the child who had spent years locked inside her grief, he saw a glimmer of the girl she used to be, and he wondered if protecting his standing was worth the cost of snuffing that light out again. Before he could speak, Veronica's phone buzzed sharply, cutting through the silence. She glanced at the screen, then looked up at him with a sly, almost triumphant expression. "It's already out," she said. "Someone just posted a photo of you, her, and the girl on the local society forum. The caption, 'Carter to wed help?'" She let the words hang in the air like smoke. Michael's stomach sank, not because of the leak itself, but because he knew exactly how quickly Charleston's rumor mill could turn poison into fact. Within hours, every board member, investor, and social contact would have an opinion. Within days, the whispers would be law. Emily's face paled, but she stepped closer to Grace, clutching her arm as if shielding her from the invisible storm already building. Grace didn't flinch, but her shoulders squared, as if bracing for impact. "It doesn't matter what they say," Emily said, her voice shaking but fierce. "They don't live here. They don't know us." Michael wished it were that simple. He had spent decades learning that perception could kill deals before they were even signed, that a man's reputation was as fragile as crystal. He could feel Robert's eyes on him, the silent reminder of everything he stood to lose. Not just business, but allies, influence, the trust of people who'd helped him climb. And yet, when he thought of walking away from Grace, from the chance to give Emily what she was begging for, it felt like betraying something far more important than a network or a fortune. Then Grace surprised him again. She stepped forward, turning to face Veronica and the others. "Post whatever you want. Share it. Twist it. I'm not ashamed of who I am. But understand this, if Michael decides to walk away, it won't be because of you. It will be because he chose fear over family." Her voice was steady, but Michael caught the flicker in her eyes. Hurt, yes, but also defiance. Robert moved to his side, his tone low. "You marry her now, you'll have to fight for her every single day. Are you ready for that, Michael? Because once you say yes, it's not just about love. It's about standing in front of her when the knives come out." Michael didn't answer. The garden felt smaller, the air heavier. He was no longer deciding between two futures. He was deciding what kind of man he was going to be. His mind ran through the years ahead, the stares, the gossip, the battles in boardrooms where the war wasn't about numbers, but about undermining his choices. But then he looked at Emily's small hand wrapped tightly around Grace's, and something in him shifted. Maybe this wasn't just about protecting them from the world. Maybe it was about finally refusing to let the world dictate what love should look like. If you were standing in Michael's shoes, would you choose the love that threatens to dismantle everything you've built, or the safety of a life without the one person who could truly make it whole? And as Michael finally drew in a breath to speak, the next words out of his mouth would either ignite a war or rewrite the story of his family forever. Michael opened his mouth, the weight of the moment pressing against his ribs, when a sharp voice from behind the crowd cut through the humid Charleston air. "You think you know her, Michael? You don't know the half of it." Every head turned toward the wrought iron gate at the edge of the garden, where a tall man in a worn leather jacket stood with his hands shoved deep into his pockets. His eyes were locked on Grace, and there was something in his gaze that made her face lose all its color. Grace stepped back instinctively, a shadow passing over her features. "Evan," she said under her breath, as though the name itself carried a history she tried to bury. The man walked forward slowly, each step deliberate, his smirk curling like a challenge. "Your gardener didn't tell you we were still married, did she?" Gasps rippled through the gathering. Emily's grip on Grace's arm tightened, her eyes wide with confusion and fear. Michael felt the ground tilt beneath him. "What is he talking about?" he asked. his voice low but sharp. Grace turned to him, her throat working as though the words were fighting their way out. I left him years ago. I filed. He refused to sign. It's been a legal nightmare ever since. He knows I can't afford the lawyers to push it through. Her voice broke for the first time, but she straightened almost immediately, trying to reclaim control. Evan chuckled darkly. She tells it like I'm the villain. But maybe you should ask why she's so eager to marry someone else before cleaning up her mess. The insult wasn't what unsettled Michael. It was the realization that this wasn't just gossip or social backlash anymore. This was a tangible obstacle, a legal and public quagmire that could turn into a scandal faster than a match to dry paper. Veronica's lips curved in the faintest smile, as though she could already see the fallout playing in her favor. Robert's face hardened, his voice low in Michael's ear. You marry her now, and he'll drag you through court for years. And trust me, he'll enjoy every second of it. Michael's mind was a storm. If Grace's story was true, then she'd been living under a shadow she never asked for, and the courage it must have taken to stand here now was beyond what he could fathom. But if he stepped forward with her, Evan's presence meant a war that would bleed into every corner of his life, his business, his reputation, his daughter's safety. He glanced at Emily. She wasn't looking at him. Her eyes were locked on Grace, as if silently asking if this was the moment everything would fall apart. Grace turned fully to Michael, her voice low but steady despite the tremor in her hands. I can fight this, Michael. I have fought it. But I won't blame you if you walk away now. This is more than you signed up for. Her words were an open door, an escape hatch, and for a moment he almost reached for it. It would be easier to step back, let the legal storm pass without ever stepping into its path. But then he remembered the drawing still folded in his pocket and the unspoken truth that if he walked away now, Emily would never believe his promises again. If you were Michael, would you step into a legal and personal battle that could consume years just to protect love and trust, or would you walk away to preserve the life you've built? And as Evan took another slow step toward them, the look in his eyes made Michael realize that this was no longer just about love. It was about survival. Michael stood frozen, the warm Charleston air now heavy with the stench of confrontation. Evan's presence had split the moment wide open, but it was Emily's voice, small, trembling, that pulled him back from the noise. Dad, please. It wasn't a demand. It wasn't even a plea for Grace specifically. It was a plea for him to be the man she could trust, the one who wouldn't walk away when things turned hard. Grace's hand slipped from Emily's arm and she stepped forward, putting herself between Michael and Evan. You've made your point, she said to her ex-husband, her voice calm but sharp enough to cut. You've followed me for years, hoping you'd find a moment to humiliate me. Congratulations, you've done it in front of everyone. Now leave. Evan smirked, clearly enjoying the attention, but Michael stepped in, his voice low but iron-edged. You'll hear from my attorney by morning. Evan's smirk faltered. Yours? You're making this your problem now? Michael didn't blink. I'm making it our solution. The word our seemed to shift the air around them. Grace's eyes widened slightly, not in fear, but in something softer, something that looked dangerously close to hope. Veronica muttered something under her breath and walked away in a swirl of silk, the other women following, their expressions a mix of disdain and disbelief. Robert lingered, his face unreadable, before giving Michael a single nod, half warning, half respect, and leaving them to the quiet. With the crowd gone, the garden felt like it belonged only to them. Michael turned to Grace, but she shook her head. You don't have to do this. I won't let my mess ruin your life. Michael stepped closer. It's not your mess anymore. If I walk away now, I'm telling my daughter that love is only worth fighting for when it's easy. I won't teach her that. Grace's breath hitched, and for the first time since the conversation began, tears welled in her eyes. Emily looked between them, her small hands clenched into fists, as if afraid that speaking would break the fragile moment. The sun was dipping lower, painting the garden in molten gold again, the same way it had at the start of the day. Michael reached into his pocket and pulled out the folded drawing. This is what she sees, he said, holding it up to Grace. And she's right. This is what I see too. Grace took the paper slowly, her thumb brushing the edges like it was made of glass. For a moment she seemed lost for words. Then she whispered, "Are you sure?" Michael's answer was quiet but certain. "I've never been more sure of anything." The ceremony wasn't grand. It wasn't even official yet, not with the legal battle looming. But a week later, in the same garden, Michael, Grace, and Emily stood under the rose trellis as the minister spoke. There were no elite guests, no champagne towers, just a handful of people who had earned the right to be there. Emily's dress was simple white cotton, Grace wore pale blue, and Michael stood between them, his hand resting lightly on Grace's back. When they exchanged vows, Grace didn't promise perfection. She promised to show up. Michael didn't promise to shield her from every storm. He promised to face them with her. And when Emily spoke, because she insisted on speaking, her voice was clear and certain. "I didn't just choose her to be my mom. I chose both of you to be my family." The months that followed were not without battle. Evan tried to drag them through the mud, and the city's whispers followed them into boardrooms and onto sidewalks. But Grace fought her case with quiet determination. Michael backed her with every resource he had, and Emily learned that family wasn't measured by ease, but by endurance. And one rainy evening, nearly a year later, the final divorce papers arrived in Grace's name. She read them at the kitchen table, Emily at her side, Michael pouring 3 glasses of sparkling cider. Grace signed with a steady hand, then leaned back, her eyes shining as she looked at the 2 people who had made the fight worth it. Outside, the roses in the garden were in full bloom again, their petals heavy with rain but still standing tall. Michael glanced at them through the window and thought about how beauty never came without seasons of struggle. He reached for Grace's hand under the table, and Emily reached for both of theirs, linking them together. For the first time since Laura's death, Michael felt the house breathe again. It wasn't the life he'd planned, but it was the life they had built together, and it was more than enough. How did this story make you feel overall? Comment 100 if you enjoyed the story. Where are you watching from? Share this video with your friends. Thank you for watching Hope Stories.